Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Coach Podcast. Since 2010, the most listened to show in the nonprofit sector dedicated to helping your charity succeed. It's no secret that combining online and offline techniques is the key to fundraising success, and practical nonprofit management advice is what you need. The Nonprofit Coach Podcast with Ted Hart is the perfect landing point to learn from experts around the world who provide advice you can use. Ted Hart is, without a doubt, one of the foremost nonprofit thought leaders. Also a successful author, his books range from successful online fundraising to expert nonprofit management. Guests on the Nonprofit Podcast are leaders in their field who share their insider tips and trade secrets in a conversational style both the experienced and novice will benefit from. Ted and his guests help you and your organization move to greater levels of efficiency and fundraising success. Ted lectures around the world, but now he's here for you. After the show, you can find all of our podcasts at tedhart.com, on iTunes, and now just say, Alexa, play Nonprofit Coach on TuneIn. Now, welcome the host of the Nonprofit Coach Podcast, Ted Hart.
And welcome here to this latest edition of the Nonprofit Coach Podcast. Thank you for joining us today. If you've come to hear all about how you can have a highly effective nonprofit board of directors, you have come to the right place. We've got an expert here with us today who is going to fill you in on the best trade secrets on how you can make sure that you are on the right path to put your organization back on the right path or to get started on building a highly effective nonprofit board. And to start off, we always start with page one. Over here on page one, Steve Nill is joining us. He's a publisher of Charity Channel Press, and today we get to say happy birthday to Stephen Nill. Welcome back.
Thank you, Ted. It's always great to be here. Thank you for the birthday wishes.
In addition to celebrating your birthday today, you're also going to introduce our speaker today, our page two expert, but also tell us a little bit about how this book came together.
Thank you. I'd love to. James Mueller has been someone that I've very much enjoyed working with. He, before I get into his professional background, which is extensive, as are the guests on your show typically, Ted, let me mention that he came first with a book about a very difficult subject. He wrote a book from the journal covering the loss of his son. His son passed away at a young age, and his book, which is also new, is called Lyrics of a Broken Heart, A Father's Journey Toward Wholeness. And that was the first opportunity that I had to work with Jim, and it was an amazing experience. The book is actually very uplifting, especially if anyone has gone through or will go through the loss of a loved one, which is pretty much the human condition. And it's just a remarkable book, and he's a remarkable man, and he and I have become really good friends while working together. But we're here to talk about a professional level book for our nonprofit peers called Onboarding Champions, the essential guidebook for every nonprofit board member and executive. The book is due out in just a few days. So let me explain a little bit about Jim and about his book, and then turn it over to you guys, because I know you have a lot of questions, Ted. Like so many of your guests, Jim has been in the sector for decades, 4 decades in his case, where he's been working with or serving on nonprofit boards, among many other things. He spent his first 10 years professional life devoted to Cornell, which is his alma mater, which was followed by executive positions at Northwestern University, Advocate Healthcare, Lake Forest Graduate School of Management, and Goodwill industries. That accounts for about 30 years in the sector, and then he took over the position of COO at Grensbach, Glyer and Associates, which is an international philanthropy consulting firm that's quite well known. And then today he is the principal of James Mueller and Associates. So he's a consultant, as so many of our great authors are, actually, not surprising. A good source for writers, actually, in our sector. Now, Jim originally came to me with the idea of a book covering several aspects of board member recruitment and onboarding and retention and so forth that really had his own unique perspective and insights, and I was so impressed with it. I got really excited about his book, and I've been working with him throughout all the phases of writing and editing and layout and all that. It's been a real pleasure. He covers in the recruitment area things like culture, character, competence, connections, composition, and in the onboarding aspects, continuity. It's a big area for him. He covers that extensively in the book. And collaboration. If you notice, he's rather fond of alliteration. and I think at one point he was thinking of calling using the 7 C's as a play on the words, and he navigated away from that idea and came up with the current title. But the idea of really looking at each of these aspects of recruitment and onboarding brought such a clarity to the process that I have rarely seen in a book. And I just really enjoyed working on this. I think I've seen a lot of books on governance. I've published several myself, and of course I've read lots more. And this just really was different in the sense that, I really came away with a model in my mind of how to think about recruitment and onboarding in related areas, and it was just a refreshing thing to work on. And so I'm looking forward to the book coming out. I know you have a lot of questions, Ted, so I'm going to back out. Maybe someone will give me some birthday cake while I'm listening, but I'm really excited to listen to you guys talk. I really am.
Well, thank you so much, Steve Nill. Again, happy birthday, and we're going to head right on over to page 2. And as Steve Nill mentioned, James Mueller is now here with me over here on page 2. Welcome, Mr. Mueller.
Thank you very much.
Well, you've got a terrific book here, and I have to say thank you for sending it ahead of publication. We certainly do appreciate you previewing this here on the Nonprofit Coach, because I really think that my listeners are in for a real treat here and having the time with you, because I think the book is so well laid out. And I want to start off by just sort of peeling back a little bit of the mystery of boards of directors. And I want to start right off with your title, Onboarding Champions, because you could view that from a couple of different perspectives. Could you not? You could view that as champions for the organization, but also you want your board of directors to be made up of champions. So talk to me a little bit about starting just with the concept of a board of directors and which approach you took.
Sure. The title itself, both meanings are appropriate. It's about onboarding champions, and that is those individuals who really understand governance, know how to plug in, and be of great benefit to the organization. And the other part of being a champion is the champion for the nonprofit. Board members have a tremendous ability to really place the nonprofit into the eyes of their communities in ways that the staff can't. And they just need to be champion storytellers of the cause. And so that's where that title came from.
I want to share with my listeners that, this book, first of all, I think is just very approachable. And that's one of the things I really like about this book. As all of us know, there are so many books that are written about boards of directors and governance, and some are just very sort of text heavy or sort of formulaic. What I like about this is it breaks it down into two separate sections, which I do want to take the time on this podcast to cover, each of the areas that you've laid out here. But the two distinct areas that you have spelled out is recruitment and then onboarding. So let's first start off with recruitment, which is, I think, one of the most important things that a nonprofit can engage in is recruiting a good, solid board of directors. But let's face it, a lot of nonprofit organizations, really sort of, basically I'll take anybody who can fog up a mirror. If they'll say yes, that they'll put their name on a ballot. But that really, we should really have higher standards. And you have outlined in this section 5 different areas that need to be focused on for recruitment. So I'm going to ask you to actually walk us through each of these. And so let's start off with culture and what you mean by culture as it relates to recruitment of a board of directors.
Yeah, one thing I did for each title, and I appreciate your recognition of its approachability, because I felt if it wasn't, no one's going to read it anyway, and if it wasn't put out there in a way that it could be applied, it would be of no use to anyone. So beginning of each chapter, for example, I define the meaning of the word. So, for instance, culture, it's the unspoken assumptions about how people should think, feel, and act, and the behaviors that result from those assumptions. So many times I've seen boards not reach their potential because the board didn't click, or it didn't have the right culture that's a performance-oriented culture. It might be more casual or something. So really digging into how do you create the right culture, and the research tells us that it's based in knowing what your core values are and living them. So part of what I discuss in the culture chapter is how to identify and describe your core values, how they're unique to your own nonprofit, and how they anchor you in every way in terms of building your culture through your performance.
I sort of viewed the first 2 areas that you write about in your book under, again, the first section, recruitment. You focused first, as we just mentioned, culture, and then you move on to character. And I sort of viewed those 2 put together as sort of how self-aware is the board of directors itself as they seek to identify new members. And that seems to be something that you feel is extremely important.
Yeah, there's another consultant that I was just reading this morning that his position is dismiss nonprofit boards because they're useless, and it's the CEO's job. Well, the problem with that premise is that it's the legal responsibility of every nonprofit is to be responsible to the public trust. And so boards of directors are trustees of the public trust. And so that needs to be paid attention to. And so character comes out to be a big piece of that. And I describe the definition I use is who we are behind our social masks and what shows up when the pressure is on. Because it's interesting to see how people show up. And I had a couple of instances that I go over with the board where people weren't treating each other very well. And so once we brought attention to that, they ended up really thinking about how do we want to conduct ourselves? What character do we want our members to possess? And by the end of that discussion about how they treated one another, they came up with a number of wonderful core values regarding how they should treat one another. So character counts.
One other author that we've had here on the show on a couple of several occasions, Kay Sprinkle Grace, speaks on this topic quite a lot, and we've sort of mused on the topic that you just raised, and that is of the role of the CEO and how often the problems come back to a CEO who is rather consciously or unconsciously undermining the board of directors, because quite honestly, building and maintaining a strong board of directors is hard work.
It absolutely is hard work. And I've seen it go both ways. I've seen instances where the board undermines the work of the CEO. So I dig into that pretty explicitly in the chapter on continuity about how the board and CEO are partners. Because if you look at the original title,
well,
I think
don't spoil it. Don't spoil it. We're going to come to that. I want to stay on task here and keep you talking about recruitment. But I think adjacent to what we're talking about here is moving on to competence.
Right. Originally, 10 years ago, as I was trying to define how do you recruit a board in a way that people could apply it, I came up with character, competence, and connections, which the connections is the next one. But competence was really the central piece for me. And the other 4 C's grew as I realized there's just other dimensions that must be primary to this building of really championship boards. So the competence piece and the definition that I use is the mastery of knowledge and skills that enables one to possess deep understanding and consistently deliver high-quality results. I often have found that boards will use a simple chart. So they'll list what they want down the left side, and sometimes they'll use the word diversity, sometimes they won't, but they'll say accounting, marketing, finance, gender, age, so they'll put these different pieces down the side, but they never really get to the core of what's good deliberation, what's sound judgment. We need to do a better job at defining what good governance thinking is like. It's not a profession, although you can bring your business acumen to a nonprofit board, but at the same time, board members need to understand good governance. And so in the competence section, I go into detail about what I see as some primary aspects of the competencies.
Let's stay on competence a little bit. Why does it seem, and you can correct me if I just have this wrong, board members are often recruited to be on a board because they have specific skill sets. Either you have a financial background. We need someone on the board that has that. You have a legal background or a public relations background. So in other words, what draws the attention of the organization is someone who has specific skills and a specific approach to business that perhaps is valued. But why does it seem that so many, not all, but so many board members join a board of directors and then appear to leave common sense behind?
That's the big question, isn't it? There's a wonderful statement by John Carver when he said, I just need to find, I wrote it down here. Give me one moment here. Well, I'll have to come back to it. I just can't put my fingers on it right now. But he talks about that particularly that boards are made up of very competent people who act incompetently, I think is how Carver put it. And I thought that was a really interesting insight that, yes, what do we do when we get there? So often little attention is paid to some of the most important aspects of governing, right? And so it's really important to not leave your sensibility outside the boardroom, but to really apply it more. And I talk about crossing the threshold of commitment, that you have to be all in. You have to just say, this is mine, the good, bad, and the ugly, I own it. I'm not going to talk about it, I'm going to own it, and we're going to figure out how we take this organization to the next level, but really to look at a broader range of competencies. Sometimes people recruit professional business acumen just because they want to get free help, but I think that's okay, and that's nice, but there are other ways to get that, and we should focus more on really thinking about what competencies do we need, and I go over those again in pretty deep detail to thrive as a nonprofit organization, and let's recruit for that.
Right. Yeah, and I often think that sometimes or oftentimes when board members sort of fall into that trap of appearing to leave their common sense behind is that they join a board of directors and it's almost as if they are taking on the playing of a role, that I'm now a member of a board of directors, and instead of realizing that it is their very common sense and their life experience and what they bring to the board that makes them special, and to not leave that behind. But do we ever say that? Do we ever make it okay to just be yourself, or do oftentimes board members fall into this trap because they feel like they must act in a certain way?
Yeah, and I go into that as well. I think that people just need to be authentically present, right, to really contribute from both their heart and mind, because nonprofits, there's a good need for people's hearts in this work, because it's quite challenging. So, I agree.
The next C under recruitment sounds on the surface of it to be sort of self-explanatory, but I think you mean an awful lot more about connections. Yes,
connections. Boards nonprofits are growing at about 5% compound rate per year, and philanthropy is growing at about half that. So there's constantly more and more pressure for fundraising. And so many boards have made that a priority, and they forget that there are other connections than to wealth. Are you connected to the community you serve? Are you connected to those who might be influential in the community to help you do your job? Are you connected in ways that will really promote you? And have you thought about that strategically, who we need to be connected to serve our mission and to expand our presence?
Now, of course, some CEOs, some even other board members might view that as simply connections of money or wealth. Who do you know who's going to bring money to the table?
That's right.
But it is much more than that. Of course, we're not going to say no. Oh, somebody who could bring money to the organization. Of course, that has value. But there's an awful lot more to connections in a community than just money.
Absolutely, and I won't foreshadow the next chapter, but I get into it more deeply when I talk about composition, about the importance of the connections that really serve the mission and serve the public trust, serve communities, serve people or animals or institutional causes that are important to communities. So it's really about figuring out what is the breadth of the ways that we need to be connected within our community. And as you said, wealth is absolutely one of them, but it shouldn't outbalance the other needs to connect to your community, because sometimes you can build fundraising committees with people apart from the board. The board, and I'll talk about later about in terms of continuity about the board's role in fundraising, but it's not the only thing, as you say.
Moving on, as you mentioned, the next C is composition, and I'm just wondering, are you going to settle the issue that so many have discussed and weighed in on? What is the perfect composition of the perfect board of directors?
Yeah. What I dig into here is the whole sense of, what's the best way to describe this? Well, probably the best way is by the definition, and that's how various elements of the whole are combined and relate to one another. And what we have missed is the whole. We've missed whole sections of our culture, and our culture is evolving so rapidly. And as I say, some minorities are going to be majorities and vice versa in the coming decades. And are we adapting to the new normal of what our country looks like? I dig into things like implicit bias, enculturation, stereotyping, and social categorization. And so I spend a lot of time in this chapter dealing with what does composition look like in our world as we live it today, especially in light of what's gone on this last summer with social justice and equity. There's a lot here. And I shared this chapter with 4 different Black colleagues who really helped me understand from a different perspective how monolithic our nonprofit sector really is. It tends to be white women mostly. But how do we adjust who we are and how we present ourselves as nonprofits if we are indeed champions of the public trust as well? So that's a big issue. I learned a lot writing the chapter.
Yeah, well, and I learned a lot by reading it, but I thought it was sort of interesting, and I wondered if you place that at the center of the book on purpose, in that so much of our society today is focused on and needs to focus on these topics of diversity and equity and inclusion. And certainly, as you mentioned this last summer, sort of laying bare, the topics of social justice. Yet many nonprofit organizations, when we're looking at composition of a board of directors, tends to look like each other, as opposed to looking like the communities that they serve, or seeking to have that kind of diversity. Because, quite honestly, it's not meant to find fault in all board members, but when we seek to spend time together with people, many people would prefer to spend time with people like themselves. Whereas, the role of the board of directors, as you said, and we started off this today's discussion with, that central role of maintaining the public trust for a nonprofit. There are no shareholders. This is an organization that's held in trust to serve the community, not just a part of the community. So I thought it was interesting that you put this composition chapter right at the center of the book before moving on to onboarding. What specific recommendations, because this is such a hot topic for everyone, can you give in terms of navigating, what are, for a lot of nonprofits listening today, are new waters that they understand they need to navigate, but don't necessarily know how to start or where to go.
Yeah, that is, well, backing up a step, it became the heart of the book, and I would say that's it. It wasn't intentional when I started out. As I wrote this chapter, it was a learning experience for me to see beyond my own implicit bias that I wasn't as aware of. Once I started talking to people of color about their take on the nonprofit sector, and it opened my eyes to see that it really is larger than I think the sector recognizes it. And I'm not only dealing with race, I'm dealing with gender, sexual preference. All of these pieces are important to individuals, and somewhat they've been dismissed, even by me, by not seeing their importance because of our historical, and I would say systemic racism. People may not agree with me, but I have enough friends in the Black community that I've seen it over my lifetime. And it is important for us, particularly those who are in the majority cultures, to take a look at how we might hold biases without even intentionally doing it, and to really do a self-evaluation. Harvard has this project called Project Implicit, and you can log on, and it's in the book, and you can check to see where your biases might be. It deals with all sorts of issues: age, gender, disability, and as you work through the exercise, it will tell you where your biases might be once you complete it. And so I encourage everyone to do that, because it's not only racial equity, it's equity across the board. And if we are representing our communities, we need to look at them and say, are we representing our communities in terms of providing what they need? As one of the people I interviewed, he said, when my son saw Barack Obama become president, he came up to me and said, "Dad, I could be president someday." And he said, that blew me away, that my son would see that, just because of what he's seeing, how our culture is changing.
There's, it's one of the things that I really enjoyed about this book is that you did place that at the center of this book as sort of the pivotal topic that has to be addressed between recruitment and onboarding. There's a wonderful educator. I'm sure you're familiar with Jane Elliott, and she she obviously speaks about a lot of different things, but one of the things that she's fond of sort of shocking her audiences, who many times she'll be speaking in front of primarily white audiences, and she'll simply ask, by a show of hands, how many of you here would want to be treated the way black people are treated? And just let that settle in, and no one raises their hand, which she then points out to say, well, then clearly there's a difference. Because if there is no difference, then you would have no trouble saying that you're okay to be treated just as a black person is, or anyone else, because there is no difference. Of course, there's a difference. And understanding that, and understanding, I think the powerful nature of a nonprofit organization is held in trust for the public good. And that public good is public writ large. So I appreciated how you focused on that. But what about the sort of the age-old topics of sort of ideal size of a board and composition? I think you're rightfully focusing on topics of today, and I think you're doing that in a way that most books written in this topic simply we're not aware of those issues or chose not to address those issues, and I think it makes your book all the more relevant for today and for today's boards of directors. But there are still issues that regardless of diversity and equity and inclusion and community representation, there are still the issues that sort of sit out there of, is there an optimum size to a board of directors? Is there an optimum composition apart from the diversity issues that we talked about?
Yes, the old adage was a smaller board is easier to manage. A larger board is better for fundraising. But I think that's also changing. My approach is don't look at shooting for a number. Look at developing a competent board of champions. So build. So don't just expand to reach your magic number. Expand a competent board, because the number of governors past a certain point, because you need to have a good chunk of members, but focus on building a competent board. I had one client that went through a tremendous transition, and at the end of the day had a smaller board, but 10 times as effective, because everybody was all in for the cause. And that's what makes the difference. So focus on recruitment of champions and build your board from there.
And of course, on larger boards, it's easier for some people to just take a back seat and let others do all the work. Listen, we're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we're going to turn our attention to the second part of this terrific book, and that is the topic of onboarding. And we'll be right back.
Life gets busy. Wouldn't it be nice to have a central place where you could save what's on your mind? With Google Keep, you can stay on top of your world by quickly and easily organizing everything you want to remember. No matter where you are.
Finalize door list for Thursday's gig.
So when you find inspiration, you can file away your ideas. And Google Keep stores them safely across all your devices. And when the time comes, you'll have everything covered. Save what's on your mind. Google Keep.
Remember, our podcasts and archives are always free and always available 24 hours a day at tedhart.com, on iTunes, and now just say, Alexa, play Nonprofit Coach on TuneIn. Now back to the Nonprofit Coach Podcast with Ted Hart.
We're back here with James Mueller, who is the author of a terrific new book, Onboarding Champions, the essential guidebook for every nonprofit board member and executive. So, James, when we went away for the break, I promised that when we came back, we would jump right into the second part of this book. And of course, moving from recruitment, the next topic is onboarding that board. And you put a great deal of emphasis on continuity, so much so that you've broken that down into 3 different sections. So let's first of all start off with continuity part 1, premise.
Sure, and I define that as the unbroken and consistent operation of something over a period of time. I was seeking for a metaphor to describe what this concept was of how everyone is well informed and hooked up, how the programs are connected. And continuity came to mind because I grew up on a dairy farm and was involved in making sure all of our electrical circuits were on place, and that made so much sense that you need to be plugged in. Circuits can't be overloaded, but it has to be well designed. So I talk a lot about that in the first chapter, about the board's responsibility to take care of continuity within the organization.
Does the premise of continuity that you lay out in chapter 6 of this book sort of lay in opposition to the rather really articulate way that you laid out composition, and where does sort of tradition and heritage run up against the need to change and modify to a changing community?
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's really about unplugging and stepping back and just taking a look at, do we really understand the organization? And one of the anecdotes that I use several stories throughout the book to elucidate the points. And the one I use in this case is a new board chair who came in, didn't understand the problems. There was a crisis, and his solution was to fire the chief executive officer and the chief development officer. And I go into detail because they had contracted with us to do a program review. And we did a very in-depth study of the organization, talking to their funders, talking to their constituents, talking to board members and staff members. And what we saw was a complex organization in crisis that probably could have been avoided, but it was more complex than the board chair wanted to acknowledge because he didn't understand the organization. And so it's so important in your educational process to all board members that they really understand what this organization does for the community and how it gets it done.
So turning our attention to the second part of continuity, people, what people are you talking about? What should we be focused on when we're in the onboarding process that for people? Who are we focused on?
Yeah, you touched on that earlier when you talked about being authentic. And so part of it is to make sure that you're focusing on the people. And so you're looking at character, competence, connections, right? But you're also looking for those who have the ability to govern, right? So that there are governance responsibilities. So as you look at people to bring them on board, do they understand what governance is and what makes a highly effective board? So that's the introduction to that section on people. But then I go into depth with the CEO and board responsibilities and how muddled that can get sometimes.
And it often can be muddled, but why do you think it gets muddled? And is there an answer to sort of that age-old quandary?
Yeah. The board, someone once told me, and I love the definition, the board is what, the CEO is how. And you need to stand on, each of you needs to stand on either side of that line. That once the board encroaches in management, it's lost its ability to do oversight because you can't oversee yourself. So the board really needs to respect that line. In addition, I see so many nonprofit board members who understand management, and they come in and they want to manage the organization rather than govern it. And I work a lot with CEOs of helping push back gently. And I have a conversation with the board chair and CEO this week, in fact, about that very topic. But we want the board to stay on the side of governance, but really help them understand what the difference is and how clearly you need to be outside the management piece and let the CEO govern. The other thing they get confused about, I find, is that they think the chair of the board manages the CEO. And this is where you held me back earlier when I started to talk about this topic, because it's a lively one. And that is, initially the title was executive director. And that title more explicitly defines the role. The CEO was or is the executive director. So they're partners in management. And so the executive director is responsible for managing the day-to-day operations and make sure that the policies and procedures, the strategy and vision approved by the board is carried out effectively. And so I also talk a little bit about how to work effectively with the board chair and the CEO. And I mentioned what I suggest is that you have a committee that works with the CEO at the beginning of the year, so everybody is on the same page, and you look forward through the year as to what you hope to accomplish, and then create a collaborative conversation every 2 months, every quarter, about how that progress is going. But lay it out at the beginning of the year, not instead of doing an assessment at the end of the year. Use a coaching process.
Yeah, well, and it also avoids sort of making it up as you go along, right? I mean, you can't know that you've been successful if there was never a plan to succeed.
Right, that's right.
Because almost anything that you do, could be acceptable. So, are you challenging yourself? Are you challenging your staff? But is it also appropriate to the resources that are available? So there, there is a dialogue here. I think when you start talking about the board of directors and the CEO and that interplay, you've got all of the listeners of this podcast, sitting on the edge of their seat, because sometimes that's a very difficult relationship, and sometimes it's a cozy relationship. So, how do you strike the right balance?
Yeah, and that's why I suggest this, having a 3-person committee, first of all, so that it deflects the board chair playing the role of supervisor, because the executive director comes with the other directors, and they have a conversation about how the executive plans to move the program forward. So at the beginning of the year, the board, these members of this CEO relationship committee, you might call it, get together with the CEO to just outline what will be expected, what will be achieved. And the board should have a lot of input on its expectations for outcomes, and it should be a conversation and an agreement. Because as you progress through the year, things are going to change. That's why I recommend 2 to 3 month intervals of check-in, so you can see where things are going, how they're progressing, and make adjustments. And again, not wait till the end of the year. But it has to be collaborative, and boards have to understand that. And the CEO as well, as you said, can either get too cozy or the CEO can undermine the board. And you have to get that right balance. And you're right, Ted, that's a tough one.
Well, not quite as tough as your next topic, continuity of finance and fundraising, where everyone's sure that's somebody else's job.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the things I say is that, and I tell this to board members, the last thing you should be talking about is fundraising. And they said, what do you mean? I said, because the last thing you do in fundraising is talk about asking for the gift. It's all about effective storytelling. So there's so many roles that board members can play in fundraising. But let's dial back to finance for a moment. The finance should be about the value to people's lives, not the bottom line exclusively. And I use a story within the book that talks about how this can be challenging. But at the end of the day, it's a decision about how can you most use your resources, because the market does not support a nonprofit. That's why it's a nonprofit. There's no market that it's stable in. So there's always going to be the need for philanthropy. Because you're serving difficult-to-serve audiences or those that there's no market to serve them. So it's important to really connect around the value to lives when you use your finance, when you make financial decisions, But then shifting back to fundraising, it's really about storytelling. And the roles I talk that people can play are investors. For instance, the pay-to-play game, I call it, and that is give or get or a minimum amount. I am vocally against that because it does so many things. First of all, it marginalizes those who don't have money or don't have a lot of connections, and it makes them less important. But it also changes the dynamic of things. Instead of having board members have a requirement for raising money, you should talk to them as investors first. If they served on a for-profit board, would they buy shares in the company? Well, are they making investments in the non-for-profit to their ability? And then the second role I talk about is being friend raisers. That is really important. Studies have shown that adding more volunteers to your fundraising program doesn't raise more money, but adding more staff members does. There have been a number of studies that show that. But the important things about friend raisers are that board members open doors that staff cannot. Board members have a connection to community and people that is critically important for raising gift potential, you might say. So then from friend raisers to storytellers, I talk about as a killer combination. And then they're gift prospects as well. So setting aside the give and get, what is an appropriate ask for each board member? The chair of the board, unless the chair is not the right person for this, and sometimes that's the case. Maybe it's the chair of the fundraising committee, advancement committee, major gifts, whatever it's called within the organization, should look at each person as a gift prospect and not expect them to give, but to cultivate their interest, to inspire them, because giving comes from inspiration. Giving from requirement leads to donor fatigue, and the gifts fall off pretty quickly. So look at your board members as you would any gift prospect. And finally, solicitors. There are some people who are very good solicitors, and to work with those, but it's a very small portion of your board. For the most part, what I've seen is about 15% that are comfortable with it. If you have more on your board, then you're doing really, really well.
What about the role of rotation and tenure on the board? Where do you come down on those topics?
Yeah, I lay that out pretty clearly in the beginning of the book, the benefits and challenges, because there's both sides to the equation. The benefit is to stay current with your community, that's going on and changes in your community. So term limits, I'm saying I'm an advocate for, because, well, first of all, if you have an unproductive board member, it's very hard to, and I've never seen a board chair interested in telling someone, they aren't doing their job and they need to leave. That hardly ever happens. And term limits gives the board and the board member a gracious way to part ways if they don't have another term that they serve on. But there's also the idea of that it keeps you current with your community. It helps you take a look each year as to what might we need this year that we didn't need last year in our board and governance. So there are a number of things. It is disruptive. That's one of the challenges. You do lose history and memory. So the challenges are part of it all, but I believe that the benefits outweigh, especially if you're trying to effectively manage an excited board that's current with its population it serves.
One of the things that I have found in particularly the finance and fundraising area is, there are so many nonprofits that sort of exist out of memory, out of just out of habit. And I think it's good for boards of directors to take time out and to just simply ask the question, why do we exist? What do we do? Are we still effective? Are we still needed?
Right.
Because when it comes to, well, it's time to pass the budget and it's time for the annual gala and it's time for these things that have just always happened, it's not always tied to, are we doing the best job? Are we meeting the needs of our community? Are we in touch with the mission that we were set out to Where do all of those
Absolutely.
fit into this sort of overarching concept that we've been discussing today, and that is sort of the self-awareness of the organization?
Right. Yeah, it is board education throughout the year. And whether it's self-reflection and evaluation, or whether it's looking toward the opportunities that it's poking around the edges, it's using generative thinking. It's a discipline, right, to constantly be imagining what could we do new, different, or better. So yeah, that's my good friend Chuck Loring calls it the history and habit that keeps us from moving forward. We've always done it this way, so we'll continue to do it this way. When in fact you need to really constantly, and that's one of the most difficult things, because you have to be somewhat disruptive in an ongoing way with a nonprofit board, because you're constantly recruiting new members. Your audience might be changing. Your mission delivery, environmental factors might be changing. So governance is very dynamic and must be alive and in tune with their environment to be effective, exactly as you suggested.
It's a tall order that you lay out to constantly be thinking of disruption, constantly be connected to a changing community, and yet we end with collaboration. So
right.
Tie that back to why collaboration sort of wraps up the 7 C's.
Yeah, it's a mindset. I talk about that. David LaPiana has written a lot about collaboration organizationally, but I'm using the word in terms of the mindset. Do I have a collaborative mindset? Am I working together to achieve a common goal? And that's really important across the board. Is, do I work well with my colleagues on the board? But am I looking at collaborative opportunities outside the board? But you can only be collaborative if you've dealt with all of the other pieces, that you have a confidence in where you're going and what you're doing, that you have the right people in the right seats on the bus, as Collins would say, around the board room table, or nowadays around the Zoom screen. But it's all really important to figure out, how do we have this mindset of internally working together, but also outside in the community. Funders want nonprofits to collaborate, and I've never seen it done very well for the most part. There are some examples of it, but oftentimes it's very hard to do because people feel their resources are so tight they don't trust. And I go into this a little bit in the book, and so they're suspicious of motives. So trying to figure out how to do that is very, very difficult. I've seen it achieved, and it's when there's a book written a few years ago called Tribal Leadership, and they talk about that the highest performing teams have this sense of a noble cause and innocent wonderment. And it's the idea that if you can key into the passion for the organization, and you really want to see its fruits in the community now, that you're going to be able to have a sense of that innocent wonderment. And when you're in that space of pursuing a noble cause, you invite others to participate. You don't put up walls, you put out invitations. So is collaboration, you sort of sail that ship back into that harbor, is collaboration the goal, or is collaboration the outcome of having been successful in the other 6 C's? The latter, I think, because it is an outcome to some extent, because it's you can get to collaboration when you get the other pieces in place. But it is something you can do all along the way. So it's not particularly just the end game of it all. It's just an important thing to focus upon once you have all of the other pieces in place. So let's say that as we wrap up our time here together, let's say that our listeners are sold on the 7 C's, sold on the concept of onboarding champions. Who starts? How do you get this going? Is this the board chair? Is this the CEO? How do you start this dialogue? Yeah, it's getting the board chair's attention and the CEO, and I talk about that partnership throughout the book, of how important that partnership is. But the CEO is more on the ground and has more ability to provide the resources to get this going. Yet the board chair has such a critical role in in the organization for really making this happen. Board chair has to be the champion of getting this done. And you start doing it because you either have a chair that's aware or an organization that's hit a wall, and you realize we have to do something differently here. Things aren't functioning. Things are falling apart. What do we need to do? Well, it's really about taking care of your culture first, which I talk about, and looking for people of character, making sure you have competence, right? Making sure you have the right connections, and then the right composition, and then continuity, that everybody understands how the organization is wired, and then they can work together to reach a common goal.
How often do you find that it's funders who are the impetus of change?
I've seen funders go both ways on this. They want to see it, but there's always a line that they stand behind. Not all of them. I've seen some that really just get really engaged with the nonprofit board member in wanting them to do things, but they don't govern the organization, so they can't affect change. They can only nudge towards change. And so I think it's a good thing for boards, for foundations to do that, but I haven't seen them have the ability to make it happen.
James Mueller, I want to thank you for being my guest here today. Will you wrap up and summarize all this for us and make sure that my listeners know how they can reach you?
Sure. There are about 1.6 million 501c3 nonprofits in the country, and many of those have subsidiaries. So we have no idea of the numbers of boards of directors. Maybe 15 million if you start to do all the math on this. Yet here are a group of people that are good intentioned, but not really trained or educated about how to do good governance. So it's really critical, because it is a fiduciary responsibility to have a board of trustees. And so to really make the organization thrive, and educating these 15 million maybe board members throughout the country, you really have to start with a framework. And so the one I laid out here, I throw in practical exercises. I have assessment at the end of the book so that it's really pragmatic. And I suggest you can tune into any section where you're really concerned. So if it's about competence of board to govern, start there and move to the other sections. But it's really about finding a place to get traction. So the conclusion has these exercises to help you do that as well. But it's a matter of working on one piece at a time. You can't tackle it all. Where is the opportunity to bring about some change or improvement, and how do you get there? And for CEOs and board chairs, the board chair is the most powerful person in the non-for-profit sector, and they need to take that job seriously, because they can destroy or create great things, right? And so it's a matter of making sure that you have the right board chair as well as the right board. So I've been doing this a long time, obviously, but I have a website, jmuelleranassociates.com, and you can go there. And I'm also happy to give you my phone number, which is 847-708-5500. And you can, on the website, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to me via email, or even give me a call or text.
James Mueller, again, thank you so much, not only for being my guest, but for writing really a terrific book for board governance for this time that brings up and raises important topics that I'm not sure you're going to find addressed in the same way elsewhere. It's a very approachable book, and I want to thank you again for your time here today on the Nonprofit Coach.
And thank you so much for that.
You've been listening to the Nonprofit Coach podcast with Ted Hart. Tell all your friends to check out our production schedule and download our iPod and iPad-friendly podcasts at tedhart.com. Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Coach.
Listen, everyone makes messes. It's just a part of life. And the bigger you live, the bigger the mess, if you know what I mean. That's why you need Fabuloso. With twice the active cleaning ingredients, it just completely takes the drama out of any mess. It smells great while you clean. The only way to describe it is the scent of passion. And once you're done cleaning, it lasts so long. You know, if you make a mess, you can get your home dramatically clean with Fabuloso. No worries.
How to have fun, anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Woohoo!
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
VGW Group. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.